Good afternoon. Welcome to FDOT's update for pavement markings. This afternoon, what we would like to cover would be a review of the Roadway Design Bulletin 1502, which addresses pavement marking materials selection. Also, Roadway Design Bulletin 1503, that was a joint bulletin with Estimates Bulletin 1502, addressing rumble striping. We'll also cover a little bit about the specification and design standard index changes related to pavement markings. We'll move on then to Estimates Bulletin 1501, which is the complement to the first bulletin on the list, which is the pay item changes for pavement marking material selection. And finally, we will cover the CAD changes related to the summary box and tabulation sheet documentation for pavement markings. At any time throughout this presentation, you are welcome to enter a message into the chat box. I have with me today Denise Broom and Chester Henson, who will be helping to cover these topics. My name's Melissa Hollis. I work with the Estimates Office, and I'll ask the others to give a little more about themselves when they begin talking. Denise will be monitoring the chat box, the questions, and if we can answer those as we go along, we will. If it's something that needs a little more research or something for project-specific conditions, we will follow up with you after the webinar. One notice here that we do want to make sure that everyone is aware of, we're going to highlight the changes presented in these bulletins, but we want to make sure that everyone understands that this is not intended to be in-depth training on every revision covered in these bulletins. Therefore, please read the bulletins for the complete details. If you have project-specific questions, then please work with the responsible office for further guidance.
Good afternoon. I'm Chester Henson. I'm a state traffic standards engineer. So I'm going to go over the roadway design bulletins on some of the changes. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go through every change. We set up this webinar mainly to make sure that you know about the major changes, that if you got a project that's due in July and you really need to know what's changed to update that set of plans or get it into compliance, I want to go over those major things that you need to know what to do on those projects. Now, the first item, pavement marking materials. We have been working with a multidiscipline team here in the central office for over a year with maintenance, construction, the QPL office, and so forth, on trying to define our material selections and how we would use materials. In the past, you know, design has a lot of times had their guidance to new projects as to what to do, but a lot of times maintenance had different requirements on a maintenance project. So maintenance has been included in all of these discussions, and what you will see now in this bulletin and in the PPM changes is something that we all within DOT concur with. So hopefully we are standardizing some of the policies between maintenance and design and construction. Now, a lot of what you will see in the pavement marking selection is really clarification, because in the past, a lot of the policy was in the PPM. There were a lot of standard indexes that had policy in it specific to certain types of markings. So we've tried to pull all of these different areas where policy might be and put it into the PPM language. So a lot of this stuff, when you read it, you'll say, yeah, I understand that, but a lot of the things may be a lot more clarification on when to use it. I want to go through the first major, these are some of the major revisions that you need to know. When you get into the material selection, the first thing you're going to notice is profile thermoplastics in section 701. Profile thermoplastic is nothing more than renaming what used to be audible and vibratory markings. And so we're going to go over how profile thermoplastic is used in relationship to rumble striping. Now, we are introducing a new policy on rumble striping. It is another form of audible vibratory, and we have specific guidance in here as to when you use profile thermoplastic and when to use rumble striping. One of the other changes is we've changed the materials that we use on bridges. In the past, there really hasn't been a whole lot of specific guidance. The only real guidance that was out there had to do with permanent tape on bridges greater than 300 feet long. So now we have a whole policy on what to do on center lines, edge lines, and so forth on bridges. So if you've got bridges in your contract with pavement markings, you really need to pay attention to the bulletin. We've modified some pavement marking patterns. It really does not affect too much except for one item. Skip and dotted, we have had a discussion over a year now on the definitions that are in the MUTCD in relationship to the patterns that we use. So we have gone through skip and dotted and clarified what is a dotted line and what's a skip line. We've also changed our policy on contrast markings. So if you've got contrast markings, you'll see the changes on contrast markings. Okay. Okay. The new material selection has a flow chart, and the flow chart is really there to help guide you as to the material selection. If you go through the flow chart, hopefully you'll end up in the right spot. But what you should always do is if it says that you're to, for instance, that the material you should be using is profile thermoplastic, you need to go to the PPM in that section on profile thermoplastic and verify that you're using it in accordance with the PPM. Now, if you find anything that you think is different, you get a different answer, please give us a call. I know we had a big discussion about the flow chart. It gets very complicated. We thought about making it into several flow charts, one if you had asphalt, one if you had concrete, to help simplify it. But the decision was made they wanted to have it in one page. So I know there's a lot of here and there as to yes and no. Now, when you use the flow chart, you're going to ask yourself certain questions, and it's going to start off at the top with begin your pavement marking selection, and the first thing it's going to ask you, are permanent pavement markings required? It's going to take you to a decision of whether you're using temporary markings or whether you're using permanent markings. That's the first question it's going to ask you. When you get past that point, it's going to, flow chart is going to guide you to, are you working with concrete or are you working with asphalt? If you're working with concrete, it's going to split again. It's going to talk about if you're dealing with just concrete pavement, or are you talking about bridges with concrete surfaces? Once you get past that decision, then you're going to go into types of lines on what types of lines and which material to use. Same thing will be for special markings, messages, symbols, and arrows. So as you go down through the flow chart, if you've got any comments and think it can be improved, welcome to give us a call and we'll work through it. I'm not going to sit through here this afternoon and actually work through the flow chart. I'm going to just really talk about some of the major changes. Okay, I mentioned one of the new changes was profile thermoplastic. The old material that we used to use for all audible vibratory markings was a profile thermoplastic. So all we're doing, actually when we started talking about rumble striping, it's creating a new method of audible vibratory. So it got to be confusing of well, do we really want to leave this other material called audible vibratory and just add rumble striping? We decided that it was confusing. So we decided to rename profile thermoplastic or rename audible vibratory markings to profile thermoplastic. So if you go out to section 701, it used to be audible vibratory. That section is now titled profile thermoplastic. Now, the decision, this is kind of where this, let's say, everybody's saying, well, we've been talking about rumble striping for over 6 months about getting this thing out. And we had some decisions pretty well made on rumble striping. But we realized that we're going to put a policy, if we put a policy out for rumble striping, and a few months later we put out this policy on pavement marking selection, it's going to mean going through pavement markings twice. And so the decision was made that we were not going to issue rumble striping until we got pavement marking selection done. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken so long to get these bulletins out. So profile thermoplastic. We are only going to use profile thermoplastic as an audible vibratory method on concrete pavements. So if you've got a project out there that's an asphalt pavement that you've been using audible vibratory, you're going to need to change it to rumble striping. Profile thermoplastic, or all the audible vibratory markings really, are using the same policy that we've had but in the past. It was rural, 2-lane, multi-lane roads, inside and outside edge lines, and so forth, 50 miles an hour or greater. We really haven't changed that policy too much. Now I'm going to go over how that policy has changed. This one right here is one of the major changes that we made to the policy, and it has to do with center lines on 2-lane roads. The old policy used to say we are not going to put audible vibratory markings on 2-lane roads unless the crossover accident rate was 4 times higher than the statewide average. That is being changed. On 2-lane roads, you will now put audible vibratory markings on the center lines of all 2-lane roads. You're going to use a different method, I mean, as long as it fits the criteria. Now, if you're dealing with a concrete road, then you're going to put profile thermoplastic on the center lines of all those 2-lane concrete roads. One thing that we did have, I had a call yesterday, in Index 518, in January or in July when we modified Index 518, we modified some of the rumble stripes. One of the things that we changed in 518, if you've been using it on interstate facilities, is that you'll notice that we've taken how the grinding process, we eliminated the transverse grinding pattern because no one ever used it. But the other major change had to do with the grinding on limited access facilities on concrete. The pavement marking people did not want us to be grinding on concrete because of the effect to expansion joints. So if you look at 518, you'll notice that on concrete pavements with asphaltic shoulders, we've moved the rumble stripe, the rumble strip over onto the asphalt. Now what you'll also notice in 518, it does not address concrete pavements with concrete shoulders. The intent was to use profile thermoplastic on those types of facilities, and that got left out of the section on profile thermoplastic. So if you have a limited access facility, concrete facility that has concrete shoulders, the intention is that you would use profile thermoplastic on the edge lines as the audible and vibratory, as an audible and vibratory marking. So I know that might be confusing because it's not in there, but I wanted to highlight that because it's not covered in the bulletin. Okay, I mentioned the policies changed for what materials we put on concrete bridges. The PPM used to state that we would use permanent contrast tape, white 1030 skip, on all concrete pavements and on bridges with lengths greater than 300 feet. Now, that was the mandatory part. You could put it on bridges less than that if you wanted to. Now, we've modified that statement. From now on, the white 1030 skip will go on the lane lines, skip lines, for all bridges, irregardless of the length. Now, we used to use on edge lines on bridges was various materials. Predominantly, we were using thermoplastic for edge lines. And what we found was thermoplastic doesn't bond real well to concrete bridge decks where there's vibration. So we've changed our policy specific to concrete bridges on what to use on the edge line. We're now requiring that the edge lines on bridges be permanent tape as well. So if you got any bridge work and you're putting down permanent markings, all the markings on your bridge should now be permanent tape. Roadway Design Bulletin 1503 deals with the new policy on rumble striping. Now, I know we put this out as a industry review and specification back for the July workbook. And there was a lot of confusion when people read rumble striping into, they did not know what it meant. I mean, it's so close to rumble stripe, people did not notice the slight difference in striping. Now, rumble striping is created by combining the rumble strip grinding process in line with the pavement markings to create another audible and vibratory pavement, which we call rumble striping. Now, rumble striping, we're using it specifically on all asphalt pavements that meet the policy, the audible vibratory policy. So where we used to use an audible vibratory marking, which was profile thermoplastic, we're now using rumble striping. Again, like profile thermoplastic, we changed the policy on when we would put an audible vibratory line on the center line. Just like profile thermoplastic, rumble striping requires the rumble striping on all center lines of all roads that meet the policy as far as 2-lane, multi-lane, greater than 50 miles an hour, and so forth, that meet that policy. So if you think of what audible vibratory is, the biggest thing is, well, is it concrete? If it is concrete, you'll stay with the profile thermoplastic. If it's asphalt, then you'll be using the new rumble striping. I'll get into a little more details when we get into rumble striping about the two different types. But before that, I'll talk about that. Let's talk about some design standard changes that deal with the marking patterns. We are continuing to use 1030 as a skip line. Now, the MUTCD calls it a broken line, but we've used the skip term loosely for, I don't know, the last 30 or 40 years. So if you look at the MUTCD, it's got very specific guidance as to whether a line is dotted or whether that it is a broken line. Now, we've always had a 2-4. We've always classified a 2-4 as a dotted line. But we've also taken 610 and 39, which we used to call skip lines, and we're now calling those dotted lines. So the pay items are really not any different. If you used the 610 before, that was a skip line, it's really just changed the name now to call it a 610 dotted. It's a name change, but not a pay item change. Is that correct?
Correct, because the units haven't changed.
Yes.
For the 16 and 2.4, the unit has changed from
Oh,
linear
yes.
foot, so it does have a new
Yeah, it does have some things.
Yeah.
Okay, the other major change that we've made to the marking patterns, we used to have 2 contrast marking styles. What you see on the screen is the 10 feet of white followed by 10 feet of black. This is just showing the contrast for a 1030 skip. We used to have a 9-inch contrast marking, which had 6 inches of white with 1.5 inches of black on each side. We are discontinuing or eliminating the edge line contrast. All contrast markings from now on will be whatever the white is followed by a black. And this will apply to 1030 skip. It will apply to 3/9 dotted, both the 6-inch and the 12-inch. So that is a kind of a big change as far as contrast. It really doesn't change you, but it does really change contractors what they have the ability to use. Used to, it was specified in the plans as to which one pattern they wanted. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about the index changes. When you've opened the bulletin for rumble striping, you'll notice that there's 2 design indexes that relate to rumble striping. The first is index 519. Now, when we get into rumble striping, this is kind of another reason why maybe it's been a little bit delayed. But rumble striping on dense graded friction course is very predictable. You can set the stop and you will, by and large, it will fall within a 3/16 of an inch max min area. So on index 519, it's put out there because we know exactly what's going to happen for dense graded friction course and what we do when we set the stop for dense graded friction courses. What we did find is when we've done these, we have done some rumble striping on projects just to get a feel for what we need to do in the spec and how we need to address some things. When we could start rumble striping on open graded friction course, we found that there's a drastic difference on grinding dense graded and a grinding open graded friction course. We started off with setting the stop at the same spot that we use for dense graded for open graded. And that depth is approximately a 1/2 inch deep. Now, if you're not familiar with open graded friction course, it's a very open mix with rock up to a 1/2 inch, and the open graded friction course is 3/4 of an inch in depth. So what was happening was when you try to grind a 1/2 inch in open graded friction course, you found out that the depth would go all the way from 7/16 to 3/4 of an inch. So we are not going to release what we're going to do permanently for open graded friction course right now. We're going to treat it as a developmental index. The index that's included with your plans that you'll put in the plans has a specific stop condition. We've started off with at 5/16 of an inch. And if we find that 5/16, we're going to review the projects. That's why it's still developmental. You'll call up here, and it's only a formality. If you want to use index 519, it's a formality, but you have to call up here, get approval to use it, and we'll issue it. There's nothing significant about that other than we want to monitor what projects it's on. You will get an approval if you got an asphalt roadway open grade friction course. You will get an approval to use rumble striping. So we're going to go with that stop set that's in developmental 519. We're going to review projects to see literally what depths we get out there, and we may modify it in the future to either be slightly deeper or slightly less in depth. So that's why there are 2 different indexes for rumble striping. Now, estimates bulletin 1501, Missy's going to go through.
Okay. As I mentioned at the beginning, the estimates bulletin 1501 is the one that goes with the roadway design bulletin 1502 with the pavement marking selection. The bulletin goes through the pay item changes to sections 701, 709, 710, 711, and 713. So you need to go through each of those very carefully. The bulletin does show the pay item structure for each of those and which combinations are valid. Obviously, if your material is only valid for the longitudinal lines, you will not see pay items open for the transverse markings or any of the messages. If it is something that's valid for all those applications, then you should see the pay item structure for those. I had a lot of help with trying to make sure we had those combinations updated, but if I've made a mistake, please ask. Similarly, we have opened up all the commonly used pay item combinations, but as the note at the bottom says, if a pay item is not open, first verify that the application is correct, that you're using it for the right location, the right material, and then you may send a request to have the pay item opened. Again, some of the restrictions that go along with that, make sure that you're dealing with either a solid or a skip line if you're looking at some of those longitudinal lines. If you're looking for a transverse marking for a crosswalk, a stop bar, or maybe a diagonal or chevron, then you'll see those available in the larger widths. Watch for the messages and symbols. Specifically, the 713 that we do not use for a lot of the messages and symbols, so you need to watch their application. Similarly for color, obviously when we're dealing with some of the blue, we don't deal with those in large quantities. They are linear foot markings for the accessibilities and accessibility markings in parking lots. And also watch those new units of measure. We mentioned before about the changes for some of those linear foot items that have gone to gross mile, even some of our net mile items that have gone to gross mile. While the quantities wouldn't change there, you do need to watch the units of measure. Similarly, Estimates Bulletin 1502 is the one that goes along with the rumble striping bulletin that Chester just went over. And we did add those additional 546 pay items for the grinding part of the center line and edge line. And remember that the thermoplastic is paid separately. If you use that rumble striping, do not forget to put those 711 pay items in there. Also, we made the unit change there. What was per mile was changed to gross mile. For those of you that don't know the difference, the old per mile measurement was taken from the beginning of the project to the end of the project minus the bridge lengths. That did not accurately reflect those quantities when you consider the lengths near exit and entrance ramps. Now with the gross mile, you will show the station-to-station locations for each of the areas to be ground and each of the areas for the thermoplastic application. So those will be much more accurate to reflect the work to be completed. Some of the specifications that have changed to coordinate with all these bulletins include Section 710, the painted pavement markings. Before, you probably just referred to that as the paint for MOT, and that was our standard paint. We've also added in the durable paint, and that's primarily for maintenance use. Section 701, as Chester reviewed earlier, the profiled thermoplastic pavement markings with the name change and all the other changes I'll describe in just a moment here, but it was to get all the consistent terminology. Section 709, the 2 component pavement markings. Section 711, the thermoplastic pavement markings. Remember, that includes both the standard thermoplastic, what we see most of the time, as well as the preformed thermoplastic. The preformed thermoplastic is normally used for crosswalks, shields, and other similar type markings. Finally, the 713 permanent tape spec was updated. All right, what type of changes did we do? The primary change there was the consistent use of the term pavement markings. Before, we sort of interchangeably used the term stripe, striping, lines, and other terms, but that has been cleaned up to be consistent, so that if you look at the specifications side by side, they are much more similar now in their use of terminology. We've mentioned here the consistent method of measurement. The net mile unit is gone, and we now use the gross mile for both the solid and the skip or dotted lines. When we started looking at the change for that net mile versus gross mile, we went back to the dictionary definition, and really what we do show in the plans are the station-to-station lengths, which was better described by the term gross mile. The linear foot measurement was changed to gross mile for the 2-4 dotted guidelines and the 610 dotted extension lines. Finally, the most recent change that we made, there was a lot of discussion concerning the removal of existing pavement markings. Our policy for many years now has been that conflicting markings would be removed in accordance with Section 102-5.8. That's the MOT specification, and payment for removing the conflicting pavement markings was included in the MOT lump sum pay item. We wanted to add, if you had non-conflicting pavement markings, then we would pay for that removal in accordance with the material to be removed. So if you had existing pavement marking, existing thermoplastic, and you were not doing any other MOT changes, therefore it was not due to a conflict, that we were not going to be milling it off, but we did need to remove a little bit of thermoplastic so that we could put the new thermoplastic down or new pavement marking material down, then we would pay for that removal under the removal of existing thermoplastic or whatever material is being removed. If you're removing some other material, we do have those removal items there. But again, we need to ensure that any of those conflicting markings are already addressed in 102-5.8 for MOT, and it's only those that are non-conflicting markings that we pay separately for. And those really, for most projects, the non-conflicting markings should be very few, other than for maintenance applications. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Denise for information on the CAD documentation.
Okay. Basically, as they've gotten all of this information to me, I've gone through and started making updates. Some things that we want you guys to know, rumble strips. We have the rumble strips that go out there on the shoulder. Okay, it has no paint associated with it. Okay, so the rumble strips, they are to be documented in the summary of pavement quantity box. And this has been, the pay items are, I went into the XML for automation to make sure that those pay items are in there correctly. So if you automate the quantities for this, it will automate, it'll pull that into that summary box for you. It's documented by station to station locations, since it is now gross mile. Missy has on here to refer to the index, of course, for like, it's mostly on interstate applications, so exit, entrance ramps, and bridges, just to see the locations of where you need to stop and start the rumble strips. And all of these are going to be in the roadway category, which is 0 to 100. So whenever you go to quantify your rumble strips that are in the shoulder, you want to make sure that you put in the very bottom of the computation box before you export to Quantity Manager the 0 to 100 to document that for transport. Then we also have the rumble striping, which has rumble strips. I'm going to wind up tongue-tied before all this is through. And basically, those are being considered part of the pavement markings, all right? It is associated with your paint, whichever type of, I shouldn't say paint, I should say pavement marking, whichever material is out there, because if there's a couple, and I had a question that came in, so I will explain that a little bit further, but the rumble strips or the rumble striping need to go, they're to be documented on your tab sheets. Of course, like the rest of the markings are going to be totaled by sheet. And when you calculate those with the DNC, or you input the quantities in the transport, they go into the 0-300 category, which is for your signing and payment markings. All right. All right. And let me go through here. Well, actually, I want to back up for just a second. I made a comment about the type of material whenever I talked about the rumble striping. And if you read everything that you're going to see, it's going to say thermoplastic. And in the end, yes, rumble striping is rumble strips with thermoplastic applied on top. However, there are times, and I even had a question that has come up on the question log, well, what if the thermoplastic isn't part of the contract and it's done later by maintenance? If that is the case, then you would put in the plans, that would be a quantity for the paint, which is in the interim. So you'd use the 710 pay items, and then maintenance and construction has assured me that they work with maintenance so that the thermoplastic comes back and they get that done through the maintenance contracts. And I know some districts work that way, some districts don't. So just be aware that that's out there. That being said, now I'll go back to what have I done in the CAD software. I've gone through and updated the DNC Manager database for SS2. I'm still working on SS3 and getting the features in SS3. Per all of these bulletins that have gone out, it's taken me a little bit longer than it normally would take, just because I want to make sure that all of the pay item combinations that are in here are correct. We are scheduled to release these changes tomorrow, January 28th. Tomorrow after lunch, Jimmy is to, he said that he is going to be working on pulling that build together for Select Series 2, MR3, and a zip file for anyone who's already using SS3. The maintenance release for that one went out 2 weeks ago. It went out on the 16th, I believe. So for anything with that is related to these pay item changes, the DGN lives for our features, of course, the DDB database, those are the two main things I can think of. Those are going to be posted on the ECSO website for download the same time that we get the MR3 posted on our website for download, so that all of this is going to go out at one time. as you go through it, Missy, can you change the presenter over to me real quick? I would like to kind of show them some things that I've changed.
Certainly.
I do that.
Move the mouse there. Change presenter. You have control.
Okay. Hopefully you see that. Do adjustments on my side because I have things you can't see, but I can see. Okay. All right. I just wanted to go through it and show you guys. I've made some big changes in here that may be a little bit confusing to some users. Basically what I did is I went through and I said, okay, we have pavement markings, and these are going to be affected. I just left that alone and just added to this category the date that these are valid through, okay? Then I made a copy of this category, and I renamed it effective July 1, 2015. In here, at first you're going, well, what's the difference? Once you start getting into here, I'll go into the thermoplastic as an example. You'll notice that the auditory or the audible markings category, it's gone. Okay, so I removed that from here. The profiled, since it's thermoplastic, I moved the profiled thermoplastic underneath thermoplastic category. So you have all of those options that you can now use. Under the, it depends on which one, but like the paint and the thermoplastic and the preformed, basically when you go into those, you have a category for your arrows, your pavement messages, and then you're used to seeing, like up here, if I go under standard, you're used to seeing all of the striping items in here based on the unit of measure. So we had linear foot, gross mile, net mile, all right? I've changed that up because now most of our paint is gross mile. It's not, there's very little of it that is actually lineal feet anymore. So I've changed this up so that now you have a category for solid and my gross mile solid markings and linear foot markings. Then I have this skip dotted, which is my 3/9 and 1030 skips. And then I have the guidelines, which is your 2/4 and 6/10 markings. And then the yield lines, I've just pulled that out, so it's kind of in line with the type of marking. Last but not least under here, and this is in thermoplastic and under paint, you have the rumble stripes, which is basically you've got two things going on here. You have a rumble strip for the center line, and what that does is all it's doing is drawing a line in the file for you for the center line computation for that rumble strip. And it is a construction element, so it does not plot. And if you'll go into your view attributes up here and you enable transparency, we've set that to a transparency of 70 so that it kind of goes out behind everything. It's not glaring, so that whenever you go to do your yellow striping down your center line, you can see very clearly, even if that is still turned on back there for that for the rumble stripe, you can clearly see where your markings stop and start in your center line. Okay, and when you look at the bulletin and you look at the IBS and the guidance that's been given out there for how to put these in the plans, the center line rumble strips for the rumble striping is not shown in the plans. Basically what you have, you gotta kind of take this into account here, is the fact that this is just an example I was doing for someone else, but I'm not showing the rumble striping in the center line. I do show it on my edge lines, and we have a left and a right setup for you. And then where the rumble strip stops, you're going to call it out just like we would at the limits of milling and resurfacing. I'm going to call out it's the limits of the center line rumble strips, or rumble striping is probably what this should say, not rumble stripe, but rumble striping for the center line. The reason behind that is that you do not want to lose your no passing zones and the type of striping that you've got going on in your center lines with too much. It gets too busy with that extra line style in there for the rumble striping. All right, edge lines. I basically have set these up, and it actually got easier when it went to gross mile. But basically for your rumble strips, these are set up, you draw one line. This is what it looks like. It's the line with the little bumps in it here. And it's, when you calculate this, you're going to draw one line, but then it's going to use ad hoc attributes in order to calculate it. So it's going to grab my thermoplastic, or if I'm using the paint items, my paint for the white solid line on the outside edges is calculating that as gross mile, as well as the rumble strips for that 8-inch edge line. It's going to calculate both pay items at the same time for you when you draw in these lines. And hopefully that helps. All right. And I think that was the bulk of what I wanted to get across to you, is that I really needed you guys to just know where things were going to be located, because I have changed things up. Of course, if you have any questions with any of it, feel free to give me a call, send me an email. I'm already getting those, and I haven't even gotten this released yet. So definitely give me a call if you have any questions or concerns about the way that we've set this up. Really quick, I'm going to see if there are any questions left that did not get answered. This one I don't know the answer to. Missy, is there a pay item for non-conflict removal? How was that handled?
The non-conflicting pavement removal, if you're removing thermoplastic, it's paid under 711. If you're removing something like the profiled thermoplastic, the 701, then we'll pay for it under the removal of the 701, because you'd have a little more work required there. The odd one there is if you're removing the actually, no, we were adjusting that. If you're removing paint, and again, it's only if you're removing paint that's not part of MOT conflicting markings, there will be a 710 pay item in there. So it depends on the material that you're removing, and we want to, again, those should be rarely used during construction, and only for those non-conflicting markings.
All right, we have another one in here. Since I think you're going to use one or the other. Since permanent tape will be used on all bridges, will the thermoplastic be placed on top of the permanent tape when thermoplastic is used on a bridge? I think that you can't see it. I'm reading it off of my screen under the questions. The guidance is that we want to be using permanent tape on the bridges unless it's a bridge that somehow meets the profiled thermoplastic, and that's rural and over 50 miles an hour, but read up on those guidelines. Then you'd be using the profiled thermoplastic, but you wouldn't be using both materials on a bridge.
If he's talking about a bridge, you should be using only the permanent tape item. Now, if there is existing thermo on the bridge, that's where a proper application of the thermal removal should be included as part of the construction.
But you're not going to specify both.
Not going to specify both. Thermoplastic would be what you would use on the edge line up to the bridge, and then you would change it over to permanent tape for the edge line till you get off the bridge, and then you'd go back to thermoplastic.
I know there was a really quick, we're going to keep going through these questions, but I know there was one more slide that Missy had that she wanted to go over. Let me flip it back over to Missy.
All right, I think we'll move on from there. A few notes that we wanted to go through for the reviewers. Obviously, there are a lot of pay item changes that are going through here, and some of the new names may have added, like where the word for messages, we put in messages or symbols. Please do not force a revision for changes such as that if the description is very close. If it says dotted rather than skip, please accept those as being valid, and we will get them in there. We're trying to get this consistency, but that should not be the cause for a revision. We do want you to watch, though, that they're using the correct pay item numbers. Again, if they're talking thermoplastic, it's a 711 item. If you're talking tape, the permanent tape, it's a 713 item. Those are the things you want to really concentrate on. The units, make sure if they have converted from a linear foot to a gross mile on the units, obviously those quantities must change. So you need to watch and make sure that they didn't just swap a pay item out, but those quantities were recalculated to the correct units. So again, we don't want to nitpick on all those descriptions, but we do want to make sure that those the pay item numbers and the units there are correct. Move on. In the presentation, we do have these links on where to find these things. Hopefully you've already got those as part of your favorites for working on DOT projects. But I will mention here that today's presentation is being recorded, and we will post a link for the presentation as well as this PowerPoint on the various web pages. We'll put it on the BOE, the CAD, and the roadway web pages so that you can find both the PowerPoint and the recorded presentation. Oops. Also, we can't get by without a thank you. We know this is causing a lot of headaches, a lot of revisions, but we understand that, as Gavin described this morning, these are the growing pains here to help us to get some consistency in the use of these items, and it will help us all out in the future here. But we do appreciate your time today to listen to our presentation. We appreciate your feedback. We did have to turn this webinar around very quickly so that it would be of benefit for you in preparing your July projects. And if you do find something, whether it's in the bulletins, in the pay items, in the CAD software, something that we have missed, there have been a huge number of changes that have been completed, please let us know, and we appreciate any feedback that you can offer on any of these changes or the presentation itself. When you have project-specific questions that don't seem to be addressed in the bulletin, let us know. Those do help us to add any other guidance for future. And we want to make sure we do maintain the statewide consistency. So we will ask the district offices to please coordinate with the responsible offices up here before you make any other district or project-specific changes. Finally, a few of the name changes. Early in the presentation, we referred to QPL. That was the former name for it was the qualified products list, And effective in January, it has become the APL, the approved products list, as part of their merger with the traffic ops APL. So it all goes under the one name now. So our apologies to the Product Evaluation Office. Other name changes, again, we've sort of interchangeably used the word striping in the past. As we mentioned, we've tried to consistently change it over to pavement marking, and we apologize if we've missed that anywhere in our presentation. I think we've covered the others, so I'll ask Denise where we are on our questions.
Oh, we got a bunch of them. All right, one of that I was typing, trying to answer now. Will there be a striping, or actually, no, that's the wrong one. Okay. Will there be a striping matrix released as before, showing the different striping types and when to use them? You know, that little chart that we had? I know I've seen it.
I think the flow chart that we now have in the PPM was intended to replace the chart that we had as a graphic there that was a draft for many months. So for those of you that, I know we had that posted on the estimates with the basis of estimates, I will be updating that to have the link to the PPM flow chart, because that will be the primary source now for choosing your pavement marking materials.
All right. Is any consideration being given to segregation 2-4 skip and 6-10 skip? This will make quantifying easier. I'm not sure exactly where you're talking about the segregation being. They are both lumped into the same pay item number, but if you draw them using the DNC manager, I've got that set up for 2-4 and 6-10, and the units are set up for the different stripe lines, so you should be getting the right quantities. Shouldn't be too hard on you. If you have questions on that one, give me a call. According to 519 index, we must also include 710 items for extra paint when using rumble striping. This is correct.
That is correct. If what you need when you get into this, make sure in 519 you read the IDS for those indexes. If you just go and look at the indexes and so forth without reading the IDS, you may have a lot of questions. But the IDS covers that very clearly about needing an extra coat of paint.
And one thing about the IDS, I got lost the other day trying to find it. I was expecting it to be on the main, like you go to the page for your index, I was expecting it to be on that main index page. You actually need to click the link to the DSR, and then you'll find the IDS. So go all the way through out there and find that and read it. It has a lot of guidance in there for designers and what you need to be looking for, and that paint is one of them. What about the pay item for the 8-inch solid line? We have it. It's in gross mile. We no longer have linear foot 8-inch anywhere. It's gone. I hope that answers that question.
I also wanted to add, as we're nearing 2 o'clock, the end of our webinar, we will continue on to answer these questions, and we will also post the questions and answers online when we post the webinar. So if you do need to leave us, fear not, we will have those written responses for you.
Yes. If the thermo is included as part of the construction contract, does the current 710-90 final surface note apply, or does it need to change?
There will be an updated specification that takes care of that. You won't need to say how many layers there, because the updated specification will say if there is thermoplastic in your contract, then you only need to have the 1 layer. If there's no thermoplastic, or 1 coat, if there is no thermoplastic in your contract, then you will need to have the 2 coats of paint. So the specification effective in July will eliminate that need for the separate specs, and it eliminates the need for the additional plan note.
I'm not sure what those were. Where can I locate the PowerPoint slides for this webinar? They will be posted out. Actually, I think it'll probably be as a PDF, but they will be posted out on the ECSO CAD and design websites, along with a Q&A document and the recording of the webinar. Answer that one. If our project is past constructability, we have yet to calculate quantities. Should we use the new pay items? That depends. When is it to be let? I'm assuming, but I hate that word, that if you're just now getting past constructability, you haven't made it to 90s, it's going to be after July of 2015, in which case you definitely need to use these new pay items. In order to get some of it to work, you're going to have to, because the pay item is changed, you'll need to, if you've already drawn everything in CAD, you'll just need to go back and select those and set them using the new items in the DNC, and you should be good to go.
If you'll notice on the roadway bulletin, where they would normally be based on where you are in your review process, we did have to change those to the July letting date because of their coordination with the specification implementation and the pay items. The specs and pay items always key off of the letting date as far as which one's applicable, and therefore the design bulletin changes had to go based on the July letting dates.
Okay. Next question. Would 711-1A-BCD old, valid through June 2015, pay items that are open be published? Does anyone else get that one?
To try to distinguish between the old 710 pay item structure and the new 710 pay item structure, there are actually two in there. I was working on those this morning. I'm trying to update, so I will be publishing the chapter again very shortly. But for today, go by what's in the bulletin there. I will have a new chapter 17 published with the most recent changes in there, hopefully in another day or two. But use the bulletin today for any of those changes.
Yeah. Somebody asked to repeat on what we mentioned about no longer any 8-inch. Yes, there is 8-inch. We just do not have 8-inch linear foot. The unit has changed. So the linear foot is no longer valid, but we do have the 8-inch striping in there, but they are just quantified as gross mile.
And that's generally used for the interchange and the urban island markings. And so they are still considered longitudinal markings and therefore gross mile.
Yes. I've had people argue that one with me. It's finally officially gone. Next question. Is permanent tape required for concrete pavement as well as for concrete bridges? Yes.
The difference is on bridges, you use permanent tape for also the edge lines. If you get into concrete pavement, you're only using permanent tape for the lane lines, which is your 1030 skip. You would not have them unless you would not have them except on that would be the only one. This is where a lot of times when you get into concrete pavement, especially on 2-lane, the audible vibratory overrides, the edge line material. So on a center line where you would normally have permanent tape on a concrete pavement, you would now have, if it's 2-lane, you would have a profile thermoplastic on the center line. So,
but that's over 50 miles an hour.
That's not 50 miles, yeah, it would be.
But if it's less than 50.
If it's less than 50, yes, you would still have the tape for the center line. The lane lines.
What goes on the lane?
again, we'll reiterate, you do need to read the fine print throughout the bulletin. And if you have a question, because it is very confusing if you're not using these on a daily basis, if you have any question, please call the applicable office and we will help you work it out to make sure that you get the right material for the right location on the right surface. Next question.
Okay, I think we're about done. And this says, maybe not in this forum, but could we clarify the use of the 710-90? Designers sometimes call for paint MOT items plus 710-90 for the last paint code, plus the thermo items. I think the 710-90 final surface paint is, in this case, is, right, okay. If you've got thermoplastic, you should not have the 710-90. 710-90 is if you're using paint as your markings. The thermo may be coming back in later by maintenance. But
So you'd have 710-90.
You would have, yeah.
You'd have
but not if I have thermo.
Yes, you
Yes.
do.
In the contract?
It's
Yes.
only one coat of paint, rather
Okay,
than two
now
coats.
y'all are confusing me.
We will get that one clarified. That one has been confusing for a long time. But Chester, would you like to take that one?
Please, because now I'm confused.
It is clarified in there that we have put it in the spec, but that still means the designer needs to understand what the spec says. So if you go out and read the 710 spec, I think it'll clarify exactly what you need. But you will always have a 710-90 on any construction project. We used to cover it by MSP, and what we're trying to do is get rid of that, where it's in the specs and it's treated, specs clarify exactly how it would be used. So 710-90, you do have it itemized in your summary quantities. You do not have quantities for it because it is lump sum, but you do have the different markings that are included under 710-90, which are basically your final markings. Now, what you would have is when you calculate the quantity, if it's one coat, then you don't have to mark double. 710-90, if it's two coats where you're not putting permanent markings down, then the quantities are double. But it's that those are there only for information purposes. It's calculated as a lump sum item. But you do show the quantities with an asterisk with where the pay item would be.
So that pay item, 710-90, goes with thermoplastic, the 711?
No, yes, it does, because you'd have one coat of paint, and then that would take care of 710-90. Then you would have all of your 711 pay items that cover your thermo.
And that's for the cure period, before they can lay the thermo.
Yes,
That
that's
one coat of
before.
paint?
Yes, that one coat of
Okay.
paint.
I hope that clarifies it. I think
We will get that one in writing, clarified,
It'll
so that it
be
helps
in the-
everyone.
It will be in the Q&A documents. Okay, thermoplastic hot spray has been evaluated by the department. Will it have more longevity than durable paint? That's a maintenance issue.
It's a maintenance issue.
That
Notice if you're dealing with refurbishment markings, you'll notice that a lot of times the flow chart says you need to talk to the district maintenance engineer to find out how long the service life of that pavement is and how long those markings need to last. And the district maintenance engineers will make those calls as to whether they want to put down spray thermo or refurbishment thermo, or whether they want to use durable paint.
And all of those maintenance pay items, if you would include on the questions list here, I've got contact information for the maintenance office would be Deanna Carroll. And if you would include her with any of those maintenance requests, we'd certainly appreciate it.
Okay. Next question. When will the revised DNC Manager DDB file be available? Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I'm working on them. I've got the one completed for Select Series 2, and I'm almost done with Select Series 3, but I also have to make sure that they work with the features in Select Series 3. So I'm almost finished. They are scheduled to be released, if I can make my boss happy, tomorrow. Tomorrow afternoon, sometime after lunch. It might be late afternoon. We're planning on having 2 posts out there, one for Select Series 2, Maintenance Release 3, which will have this database in there for Select Series 2, as well as a zip file that will just need to be placed, just unzipped into the f.ss3 directory on top of MR1 that was released a couple weeks ago. Those will both be posted tomorrow. Do we show 710 as a line item on the tabulation of quantities in addition to the asterisks in the statement at the bottom of the tabulation table?
Okay, now the note at the bottom of the table talks about 1 coat or 2 coats, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on, can you scroll
No,
that?
we don't have.
I can't see it.
It's not along.
It's something that you won't be able to view from up there. I don't think. Well, you could actually. Let me see. There's a. Here, I'll have this.
Yeah, we still need to show 71090 as a line item on the tabulation of quantity sheets.
That one.
And with that will be the asterisk quantities for those that are included in 71090.
Sorry, we were pulling up the questions here so that we can get to, and I'm not sure where Denise left off.
That was the back one you were just
I was
on.
going to say, just go.
Top?
Yeah.
All the way to the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, because really, there's only one left that I have as of right now. Is there a high-performance pavement marking tape that is white/black for 10-10-20 skips to be used on concrete surfaces?
Not one pay item. You pay for your length of white. You pay for the length of black, and it should be the end to end. We don't pay for just the length minus the gaps there.
But if the question is, are there products out there that make that? Yes. One of the major reasons we got rid of the edge line contrast was that it is a proprietary product. There's only one person that makes it. There are multiple vendors, you mentioned high performance, which we don't call it high performance anymore, but they meet the old requirements of it. It's permanent tape that have the 10-10 white-black combinations.
But when you tabulate it, you will have to do the separate pay items for the white and separate pay item for the black.
So basically, I've got those items in there for you, and they're calculated as 10/30s. So because you have to have 2 of them, so it's the same length times the 2. Unless I get corrected on that one too. So I think that was it. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Missy said, I just want to reiterate, I know this is a lot for you guys to have to take on at this late date. I've really been pushing it in order to get the DMC manager with all the new pay items and the tools in there in CAD for you guys to do your quantities. If you have any questions at all, please give me a call. And as I said, this hopefully, cross your fingers, I'm going to have all of this pulled together and we'll get that posted tomorrow afternoon. And other than that, just thank you for joining us, and we will help you in any way that we can.
We'll leave the questions open for a few moments, but we will be terminating the audio at this point. Thank you.